We are live with Studio Brûlé, and I have Paul Elam, the founder of A Voice for Men, here to talk about recent developments on A Voice for Men. And Paul, welcome to Studio Brûlé Live.
Hi, Steve. How you doing? Good to be here. Hello, everybody else.
So, Paul, we had a brief talk earlier, and there's some changes of focus and new things going on at A Voice for Men. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, I can. I'd love to. I want to start, though, by diverting you off topic. I've got to tell you, I've just got to say that I am absolutely rabidly in love with the work that you're doing with Janice Fiamingo right now. We have put the videos you're doing with her into our sidebar, renewing them every time they come out. I'm glad to see that they're getting some attention. I hope they get a lot more, but I want to say to everybody, if you haven't seen Steve's work with Janice, these weekly videos, they're absolutely fantastic. Great addition to the men's movement, badly needed. And Janice is really coming out as something special. But anyway, so I'll quit kissing your butt and move on.
Well, thank you very much for mentioning Janice, because she is a treasure and she's a pleasure to work with as well. And I have to give all the credit to Janice for her really brilliant insight into so many topics that she writes about.
She's mind-blowing. She absolutely is, because she really does cut down to the chase like very few people are able to. Looking forward to lots more of those. Anyway, the focus of A Voice for Men, it's hard to talk about that really, Steve, without talking about A Voice for Men's history. And it's running 6 years strong now, starting out as a personal blog and then turning into a full-blown publication that has actually had a pretty darn significant impact on the cultural narrative about gender politics. As a matter of fact, I think as I look around and I see all these different, we live in a very different world with the narrative than we did 6 years ago. Since AVFM has come on board, we've seen an explosion of other efforts, other great efforts by people, and some people that I may not agree with all the time, but are still doing really great work. We've got Milo out there, Lauren Southern. I mean, just one person after another is really starting to carry at least the sentiments that we have been talking about for 6 years on A Voice for Men into the mainstream. They're causing quite a stir. So in some sense, we worked ourselves out of our basic job, which was to make it acceptable to talk about men's issues and to make it acceptable to stand up to feminists and to say, we're not going to listen to this stuff anymore, or the other issues will be put on the table. That's been done. I mean, the world's changing. Fewer people than ever identify as feminists, and I think for very good reason, even though for the same good reasons, most people identify as being for equality and equality under the law. Most people won't identify as feminists. So I think society's finally starting to figure out that feminism and equal rights are two entirely different things, especially with the third wave, which has certainly gone off the rails in terms of logic or any sensibility whatsoever to facts. So it leaves us in a position at AVFM of saying, we have to do something different now. We can't just, keep up the same drumbeat that helped change the narrative on gender politics and matters of sexuality. We have to move into specific areas. So one of them, we've got three key areas, and I'm only going to discuss one of them tonight. One of them is the area of male genital mutilation. This is something, there have been intactivists that work on this for a long time now. Yet we are not seeing any kind of significant reduction in mutilations. We have in Canada where they quit paying for them and they were cut in half. And I guess that's where I want to start, is that, and feel free to chime in, Steve, anytime you want to. It seems to me that other than people who do it for conscious religious reasons, such as in the Jewish community, most people don't even know why they have their children cut. They just sort of do it. They do it because dad had one and dad's dad had one, and because This is what we do. We have a baby boy. We cut the erogenous tissue off of his penis without even realizing that's what we're doing. And we don't think about or talk about the fact that over 100 babies a year in the United States die from this mutilation. And there is an abundance of science now available, and I'm going to talk about some of it tonight, that really demonstrates what a horrific and barbaric practice this is, and how much money is being made of it, and the fact that we're even selling off the foreskins of young boys that have been cut from their bodies to make skin cream.
That was a real shock to me when I found that out last year. Skin cream from foreskins. This is verified, right?
Yes,
this is not like some kind of exaggerated thing.
Right. No, it's not exaggerated. Oprah has been promoting a product that uses stem cells from male foreskins for a long time now. And this is like, can you imagine if we remove the clitoris of baby girls and use it in some sort of men's product? The level of righteous indignation, that we would have riots in the streets over that. And because it's happening in boys, we don't even mostly want to talk about it. So one of the things we're going to do, and I'm going to get into this, and then hopefully we get a chance to talk some about the real effects of neonatal cutting, is that we're going to do somewhat of a controversial move. And it has already started, it's already in the planning, and we're going to be looking for help with it too, not financially, but we will need a little bit, some people to pitch in some technical skills to help us out to get this done correctly. But if you remember, I'm sure you remember registerher.com, which was a website that the mainstream media had a heyday with us on that, and probably sent about 5 million people to avoiceformen.com, which were...
Is that right?
Yeah, that's about what my estimate is, that we probably got 5 million page views anyway, out of registerher.com, just because of all the moaning and wailing and gnashing of teeth over the fact that we did what with some women would have been done with men as a routine, a matter of law.
Is that closed now, registerher.com?
We passed it off once it served its purpose. It made the point that if you want to start putting people on registries, and if you want to start organizing a list of people, that can be done with women too.
And what were you registering women about on that?
98% of it was women who had been convicted or admitted to violence, child molestation, incest, violent crimes like murder, those sort of things, and who were basically let off, given a slap on the hand, who were compared to what would happen to men in those circumstances, who got off pretty much scot-free. And we thought, I mean, we're talking about people like Karla Homolka, which we think is an obscenity that this happens to begin with. I do, personally. And I thought it was a good idea to have a place where, you can say, here's your examples. And when we live in a narrative where all the violence is supposedly men, all the sexual predation is supposedly men, we had a living, breathing example that wasn't true. Well, since now, even feminists are having to admit that not all sexual predators or domestic violence abusers are males, the site itself and the controversy around it has pretty much outlived its purpose. So we passed it on to some people and have forgotten about it. We're moving on, but we haven't forgot the efficacy of the technique of doing this. And that's where we come now to childmutilators.com. Very hyperbolic name, unless you consider the fact that these really are child mutilators, that's not an exaggeration. It's not really hyperbole. It's the real story. These guys are cutting up the genitals of little boys so that they can pay for country club memberships. We have, and they're doing it using whatever by hook or crook they can. There's a Dr. Kim here in Houston, as a matter of fact, that on the front page of his medical practice website, he has a big fat quote from Genesis talking about how you're supposed to get your child circumcised, or why it's important religiously to be circumcised. That to me is about as unethical as it gets. When you're an MD, when you're doing medical services, you're supposed to do them by medical necessity or with adults for elective surgery. All that's good and well. But when you're talking about defenseless patients who can't say no, who are in fact strapped down for the procedure at the behest of their parents, we tend to forget that the one being strapped down is the patient. The parents aren't the patient. The parents are people that are making decisions to have a largely cosmetic procedure done on a child that the research now indicates damages them for life, damages all men for life. And not to ramble too much, let me give you one research example about this out of the Philippines. They did a really longitudinal study of several thousand men in the Philippines. And in the Philippines, there is two forms of circumcision, or neonatal cutting, actually, mutilation. There's two forms of it, and there is a ritual circumcision and there is a medical circumcision. And I'm not going to remind myself about circumcision all the time. I use the term euphemistically because it's really not an accurate description of what's happening. But in those groups, they found that 50%, if you measured post-traumatic stress into adult life, that 50%, that's 50% of men who had been medically circumcised, medically mutilated, registered several symptoms for post-traumatic stress disorder, compared to an average population of uncircumcised people of something like 4 to 5%.
So it's about double. Did you say 7-8%?
4 to 5% uncircumcised, 50%.
Oh, 50%.
50%.
Okay, I didn't hear that correctly.
And in the non-medical, in the ritual circumcision group, it was 71% registered the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And this fits very much with the research out there that's demonstrating the absolute positive correlation between male genital mutilation and post-traumatic stress. And that is only one problem. I'll give Dr. Kim's website as another example, going back to him. I looked and read into what he forecasted as possible side effects from circumcision. And he's telling his patients that infections and that occasional, surgical problems come up. Occasionally the tube that carries urine from the bladder out the head of the penis can be affected and cause a problem with there. He didn't mention the 100+ baby boys in the United States that die every year from this procedure. He did not mention the countless others who become just absolutely scarred and ruins their life. There's even been, there was a story recently, and I'm sorry I can't remember this person's name, but their circumcision was bought so badly at birth that the only option the doctors felt like they had left was sexual reassignment surgery. So they literally turned that case into, okay, well, we screwed up the circumcision, let's turn him into a girl. And he lived with it and tried to adjust for 38 years and then killed himself recently because he couldn't live with that. The research also indicates that this procedure interferes with breastfeeding, with mother-child bonding, that it can result in sexual dysfunction in middle age much earlier than you would normally expect in an uncircumcised male, that it has tremendous impact on things like depression and alexithymia. And for those of you who don't know what alexithymia is, It is an emotional condition in which the person has very great difficulty even experiencing their own sense of emotions. And I would suggest Googling that and looking up, because alexithymia is one of the major consequences of genital mutilation in men. There is a laundry list of horrific problems that are happening right now to men. And the social work community who's working with families who are having babies, the medical community who's performing these procedures and making money off of it, and the religious community is standing by, whistling and looking in the other direction. And it's time that we started calling out these people doing it. And there's going to be some controversy in this, because we are going to be calling out some rabbis for doing it. And of course, I anticipate that the objection will be that I'm an anti-Semite, because why else would I call out a rabbi for mutilating a baby boy? Must be because I hate Jews.
The whole religious motivation. How do we deal with that? I don't want to cut you off there on your stream. I know you have a lot to talk about. I just want to mention to any viewers, I'm trying to monitor the comments on the YouTube stream. So if you have some questions for Paul, this would be a good time to put them in the comments there. And Paul, I just wanted to ask you also, you've referred to several research articles. Do you have links for those that we can include in the comments?
Yes, I will get them. I will get you a bunch of them.
Okay.
Come the end of this program, I'll get them to you this evening. So at least for your viewers now, listen up. I'm going to provide the research. A lot of the viewers of this program probably won't need it. They've already read a lot of it. But for those newcomers or people on the fence or the curious, I'll be happy to provide the very legitimate research. In the meantime, anybody can Google doctors opposed to circumcision, and we'll find a wealth of research studies that concludes beyond any doubt, this is mutilation. This is a barbaric, savage mutilation, and most people don't know why they're doing it. I want to get back, I've got more to say on that, but I want to get back to the religious aspect of this for a moment. It's difficult, because here we have one of the cultural factors is that rabbis perform this procedure, whereas in the Christian world, they have it done by somebody else, but typically do not do them themselves. Same thing in the Muslim community. It's practiced, but it's done in medical hands, whereas in the Jewish community, it's frequently done in the hands of clergy. And so I won't be calling out Christian ministers, not because I favor them over rabbis, and I won't be calling out religious leaders in the Muslim community because I favor them over rabbis, but because it is usually doctors that are doing it in those two other communities. However, in the Jewish community, their clergy does it, and their clergy who have frequently I mean, it's, again, you think about it, there are religious practices where the rabbi actually touches his lips and sucks the blood off of the penis after the baby's been circumcised, and babies have transmitted herpes this way and they die. And I will provide you links to stories from New York about that happening right now. And yet the government, nobody will challenge the Jewish community to stop this insanity. It just keeps happening. So we are going to challenge them. And if people want to think that I'm an anti-Semite because I'm defending Jewish baby boys from being butchered and mutilated, then they're welcome to that opinion. But we just have to say I strongly disagree with them. But moving on to the other effects and what we have found out, and people need to know this. Again, when I talk about people saying, oh yeah, well, checklist, we got this for the baby, that for the baby, the circumcision, let's get that done. When people are approaching this that way, they're doing so without the knowledge that circumcision, as it's practiced right now, we had a great drop historically in circumcision because people figured out it was a really horrific idea. And then Dr. Kellogg, the man who invented Kellogg's cornflakes, very much, I think he was a Latter-day Saint, a very super religious fellow that didn't like the ideas that little boys would masturbate. So he gathered a bunch of fraudulent research and sort of made circumcision a disease looking for a cure, or rather, a cure looking for a disease, actually, and proposed that it solved everything from polio to smallpox to get your baby circumcised, that it actually offered protection for those things. But his agenda was that to stop and to quell male sexuality, to not have boys masturbating. And of course, boys still masturbate, maybe less frequently in circumcised boys, but his whole position was a religious one. And I'm sorry, but I just, again, I don't believe hiding behind religion in the name of mutilating children is adequate in 2015. It's just not acceptable.
Paul, is there any medical benefit to circumcision? You hear people throw out this disease prevention idea from time to time. Is there any basis to that?
Well, yes, there is, but again, it's sort of like examining feminist literature. There may be something at the very top of the pile that looks somewhat promising, but when you start digging into it, you find it's not quite the case. There is a 1 in 111 chance of uncircumcised or uncircumcised boys getting penile cancer. At least, and again, these numbers don't mean a whole lot, but those are the numbers. So if you're not circumcised, you have 1 in 111 chance of getting penile cancer.
However, just want to interject in there for 1 second. Now, isn't the HPV virus implicated in the penile cancer, and doesn't that vaccine address directly that issue?
Yes, just as the matter of urinary tract infections and infections from coming from underneath the foreskin can be addressed with hygiene. When we get an infection, if girls get a urinary tract infection, we give them antibiotics, but we tend to look at a way preventative medicine for boys is to mutilate them. Quick to go to the cut. Yes.
Well, in Canada, we pay for the HPV vaccine for girls, but we don't for boys.
I saw a news story on that. It was absolutely blown away of how.
Is it the same in the U.S.? Is it the same in the U.S.? They pay for it for girls, but not for boys?
No, most of those things, those vaccines are going to be done under insurance medical recommendation. We don't have freebies like they do. Our healthcare system is so entirely different, but I don't think that would even survive the United States, as bad as things are here. To come out and blatantly say we've got a needed drug or a needed vaccine, and we're going to give it away to girls, but boys have to pay. And I understand that vaccine is upwards of $200 to $300.
Yeah, I don't think it's a cheap one for sure. But no, it's not the only example either, Paul. Like we have, there's another. Oh shoot! Now it's escaped my mind now. But there's another example of that as well, where we provide it for girls but not for boys. It'll come to me later. I'll try and remember.
Yeah, and that's part of the same mentality that prevents the kind of discussion that we're having right now. But back to the penile cancer, okay, 1 in 111 are predisposed to having penile cancer. Circumcision may or may not help with that. That's fine. Well, 1 in 8 women are predisposed to breast cancer. Does that mean that we should perform radical mastectomies on all 13-year-old girls in order to prevent them from getting breast cancer? Of course not. These are really, they're just false flags that are tossed in every direction that are misleading people about the nature of the problem. The fact of the matter is, particularly in the United States, that circumcision is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. Dr. Kim, by the way, puts on his About section that he loves spending time with his family and playing golf. And he is obviously catering to religious people who want to cut on their children. And that's how he makes his membership fees for the country club, to play his golf. And it's time people started knowing this. There is so much. I mean, we couldn't even cover all of circumcision and the negative effects of it and what have you. I know that there's I'll get you another study where they demonstrated empirically that neonatal cutting or that sort of mutilation results in a loss of 75% of sensitivity for men sexually. Think about it. A minimum of 10,000, some say 20,000 nerve endings in that foreskin, in that tissue, are cut away. The entire female clitoris has 8,000 nerve endings. That's the type of sensitivity we're cutting out of little boys when we're not even conscious why we're doing it in most cases. So anyway, the point was that the medical community in particular, more specifically, like I said, we're going to call out anybody. I don't care who you are. If you're cutting on little boys, we're going to find out and we're going to cut out and we're going to put you on a directory at childmutilators.com. That site is really geared, and here's how it's going to work. I really believe in the old Vince Lombardi mentality. And Vince Lombardi, of course, great American football coach. The Super Bowl trophy, the Lombardi Trophy, is named for him. He's one of the greatest coaches in history. And his theory was that if you execute, if you do what you're going to do well enough and you follow through, you can hand the opposing team your playbook, and it won't make any difference. They won't be able to beat you. And so I'm sort of tipping our hand on what we're going to do. But what we intend to do at this site is to create a directory there, put these doctors on it, and then when people go researching their practices, when they get pregnant, when they think about who they want for their OBGYN, they will go to Google and search. And unless the doctor's name is John Smith or some other name like that that's going to pull back 10 billion Google results, they're going to see front paged on Google returns the fact that this doctor has been put in a directory on a site called childmutilators.com. When they go there, it is not to get them to go, oh my God, this is a terrible person, because what they're going to be presented with primarily at childmutilators.com is all the research and data that's available, all of it, that indicates very strongly that they should not be doing this to their child, or they should at least stop and ask themselves why they're doing it, what the importance is. Because I really believe that most loving parents, which most parents are, that if they stop for a moment and ask themselves, why am I going to do this to my child? Why is it important to me? But they have the information available to them, they're very likely to reverse course. They're very likely to say, wait a minute, do I want to set him up for instance, what I want parents to hear? Here's a good one parents should hear. Most mutilations are done without local anesthesia. They just cut into one of the most, there's more density of nerve endings in the penile foreskin than there is in fingertips. And that is cut directly off with the baby screaming, no anesthesia in most cases. And then some doctors, like Dr. Kim in Houston, use anesthesia, and then he disingenuously tells people that post-operative pain is minor and can be handled with anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen. What the research actually says is that cortisol, the stress-related hormone that's released in conjunction with pain and stress, absolutely spikes in a terrible way in a newborn who is circumcised and remains at abnormal levels for 6 months after that. So consider that the first 6 months of a newborn baby's life that's been had neonatal cutting performed is an environment of stress for the brain the whole time. It interferes with so many other functions. And these doctors are just flat out ignoring the research. They're not keeping themselves up to date on research. And often when they're circumcised doctors, they tend to justify. They have anxiety about their own circumcision. They tend to justify and ignore any evidence to the contrary.
Well, it's certainly a wide cultural practice, so it's difficult to, at the best of times, to change a practice that's so deeply rooted in culture for so many years.
which is why I think, Steve, you have to force that change.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery was deeply rooted in our culture for a long, long time. And it took a lot of dead people to stop it. And I'm certainly not suggesting at all that it's going to take dead people to stop male genital mutilation. But what I'm saying is that human beings are capable of normalizing and justifying the most horrific of things. Look at the Crusades, look at the Inquisition, look at slavery. I mean, and all of them, unfortunately, somewhere in the narrative of all those things was God's will. Slave owners in the southern United States used scripture to justify what they were doing.
And that would be the same root for circumcision as well, right? That God said so.
God said so. That's why Dr. Kim has a passage from Genesis, I think it's Genesis 17:11, on the front page of his website, instructing that we would all be circumcised. Because religious authority is a very powerful force in religious-minded people. And so if it's God's will, I don't have to think about whether or not I'm putting my child's life at risk. I don't have to think about the fact that I'm mutilating him. All I have to do is know that this is God's will, and whatever consequences come out of it are not about me. They're about, my deity.
And that's one of probably the biggest barriers to affecting this change, is that the people involved, they really believe they're doing the right thing for their children when they do this. So, I mean, that's...
Well, they do, but again, I hearken back to what we've seen. Some of the most horrible things in history is people thinking they're doing the right thing because God said so. I mean, we get people tortured in the Inquisitions in the most, you can't even imagine some of the stuff they put people through in that, all because God wanted them to, and slavery because God said it was okay. I'm saying, I'm sorry, this is 2015. That's not an acceptable excuse. It's not ever going to be acceptable in any culture that has any compassion. And the only reason that this goes on right now, unabated, is because it's boys. I think Ann Coulter, who I'm not a big fan of, by the way, I'm not a huge fan of Ann Coulter, but she made a pretty, I think, insightful quote to say that when we heard about female genital mutilation, it was outlawed 20 minutes later. And now even getting people to have an intelligent discussion about male genital mutilation results in what I'm sure will happen. I'll be called an anti-Semite. I'll be called a heathen that doesn't believe in obeying God's will. And my answer is going to be not if it means mutilating little boys.
Well, you sound like you have well researched this, and the research is on your side about this. It's what I'm hearing so far, and I have to admit I haven't read any of this research that you're referring to, but it sounds reasonable, and it sounds compelling.
I think it is. And a matter of fact, I know it is. This isn't really, everything should be debated. I'm not going to take the feminist track of saying we don't need to debate this. I think we should debate this. But I think we need to debate it as grown-ups that are willing to take the science that's available in hand with a very sobering look at it and understand we're harming people with this. This is not medically necessary. It's not medically necessary. In some cases it is, but the vast majority of neonatal cutting is done just at the behest of the parents because they want it done. And as we found out in Canada, when they quit paying for it, it dropped in half. That tells you that the decision to mutilate is an unconscious one. Oh, if it's free, check. Go ahead and do it. Oh, wait a minute, I got to pay something? Well, never mind, they don't need it. This is the kind of arbitrary, capricious decision-making about the lives and futures of our baby boys that needs to be challenged in this culture. And the way we're going to challenge it is we're going to profile the people who are profiting on it, and we're going to make sure that everybody that checks them out on Google knows what they're up to and knows what they're doing.
So that's childmutilators.com, mutilators with an S.
Yes, the URL is live. There's not a website, and they're all part of one of the reasons I was looking forward to doing this is to put a shout out. We don't need any money to do this, but we would very much like a well-intentioned person with good WordPress skills to help us develop the site. It's not going to be a complicated site. We're going to get a nice logo for it, but we want to put together a team. And this is what I'm doing now. I'm making a reach out, not only to my own staff, but to others, to say that if you have some skills to bring to the table, that we would like them there, and to help us build this. And once the site is built, we will take it from there. And there will be press releases, there will be all kinds of energy put into this, and we're going to make waves with it, because the time is over. I mean, I think a lot of the intactivists that I've seen work, and I think a lot of the MRAs that I've seen work, but we have failed miserably. And I mean, in the worst way. We have a robust movement going now, doing a lot of things, changing the narrative, but we have actually absolutely failed in one of the places that it counts the most: our baby boys, who aren't even they're not even given a chance to start life protected from being sexually mutilated.
Well, I want to follow up on Ann Coulter's theme there, where she mentioned the contrast between FGM and MGM and our response to it. You know, I mentioned earlier that in Canada we pay for the HPV virus, not virus, but vaccine for girls, not for boys. Also, we pay for breast cancer treatment, breast cancer testing, mammograms, and everything for women, and that other pap smear thing for women, but we don't pay for prostate cancer tests for men in Canada. The other thing I wanted to mention too is that in the UN, I'm pretty sure, is strongly against MGM, right? Female genital mutilation. But I read an article some time ago that said that the UN actually promotes circumcision or male genital mutilation in Africa on the basis, they claim, that it protects women from AIDS. So there was a case a year or two ago where a guy was hunted down by his villagers and held down and publicly circumcised against his will. And I don't know if you remember that one.
Yes, I believe me.
So this is coming from the top of the world, from the UN, which, if you want to believe the UN is the top of the world, but essentially it is a global organization with a long reach. And
it's not just the UN, Steve. It is the UN in concert with people like Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Foundation.
Is he promoting MGM as well?
Yes, their aim is 25 million circumcisions in Africa.
And what is their justification for this? I presume it's for protection of women, apparently.
Well, because they have taken, who knows what the ultimate agenda is? It's probably money, but let me give you just a little background on this scenario, on what's actually going on there. There was a series of studies called the Orange Grove studies.
Orange Grove?
Yes, I think it's Orange Grove or Orange Farm, but I'm pretty sure it's Orange Grove. And those studies indicated that the circumcision of males may reduce transmission of HIV. Those studies have been completely and totally debunked. They're absolute nonsense. There were all sorts of methodology problems. There were problems in the control groups. There was what little control groups there was. It didn't pass peer review. It was totally ousted, but they still, people like the Bill Gates Foundation, Hillary Clinton, and elements in the United Nations have latched onto this study, saying here, if we go in and forcibly, and so what they're doing, the reason that guy got held down is because they're sending operatives into African villages, convincing the women to try to shame the men and push the men into circumcision.
Okay, let's hold on that point for a second.
Okay.
This is the first I've heard of operatives going out. Now, I could understand the UN and their people promoting these things. I don't understand I don't support it, but I can understand the fact that they have that reach. Where are you coming across this information that there's actual operatives encouraging this in these small communities?
This comes from a lot of the investigative work by Robert O'Hara, who made contacts with some radio programs, some intactivists in Africa, and who carried on long conversations with them, hearing their concerns about what was going on. But suddenly, after the UN latched onto this idea, when then just a few months, Many of the women in African villages were demanding men get the cut. Information was disseminated to them that told them that men need to get the cut because it'll prevent women from getting AIDS.
That's coming from the UN, that part,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And so they had to have people do, out in Africa, they don't have the internet in a lot of places. They have to have people carry information. And so when I say operatives, that information came from the UN to those villages by some vehicle, somebody with the intent to convince the women in that community. And of course, as we know, the instinct in human nature is for men to act on behalf of what they think women want. So you get a lot of guys and a lot of children getting held down and circumcised. The one case that you talked about, I'm familiar with, but there's a lot more than that. It's going on very rampantly right now. Now, here's the kicker to one, and I will get the guy's name for you and get it to you, is that one of the major proponents of all this 25 million circumcisions that they want to accomplish in Africa is a guy who developed the medical clamp used in the procedure. Think about that. And those
this is all too likely a motive. I mean, this is the profit motive. This is so often the money behind the scenes, the money to be made ends up being the reason why unacceptable things are done.
Yes. And if you're talking, you take a medical device like that runs 100, 150 a piece, multiply that by 25 million and see what you come up with. And I'm not saying that's even the cause. I'm saying we have bits of information to sort through, but the basics that we know is that circumcision does not prevent the spread of HIV. Circumcision is a dangerous procedure that harms people in the process. And if you're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, you're talking about many places without sterile medical facilities where people are held down in dirt and cut with knives that aren't scalpels or razor blades. And this is, again, some of this is so horrific that people want to shut it out, or they want to say tinfoil hat. That's fine. Luckily for me, I don't have to fight that battle here. I mean, we're going to be talking about Africa a lot, but what we're talking about mainly here is in the West, where everything is out in the open, and especially where the research is out in the open that demonstrates that this is a horrible thing to do to another human being, that it should not happen without medical necessity, and that parents should not be allowed to decide on cosmetic surgery for infants. Because when we look at what some of the other research producers finds, is that a lot of the motivation, of the unconscious motivation to have a child mutilated, is because the father was mutilated and they want the baby to look like the father. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm sorry, you're wanting your baby to look like you is not an excuse. If we've determined that the procedure is a mutilation,
either it's not good thinking, it's not good parenting, it's not ethical to propagate one wrong because it feels right. It's just wrong thinking. Yeah, you've sold me, Paul. I just want to ask you: again, there is no real valid reason for circumcision, is what I'm getting out of this. The only one you brought up in this conversation was the possible 1 in 111 chance of penile cancer.
Slightly elevated risk of urinary tract infections. You can get an infection at the head of the penis if you're not practicing good hygiene.
But those are all treatable.
All preventable with knowledge, every last one of them. And there are some circumstances, and I won't be able to give you the exact medical terminology right now because I don't know it, but there are some situations where a circumcision is warranted. There may be a malformation of the penis that requires a circumcision to correct, so that a boy can eventually achieve an erection without pain. And that pain will shut down the erection. So if he doesn't have one, he is relegated to a sexless life. Those circumstances do need to be medically determined, and I think that circumcision is an unfortunate but necessary evil in those cases. But we're talking about a tiny fraction of circumcisions, almost none. Almost all the circumcisions that are done with no medical necessity whatsoever. And the ignorance of the medical community about this is abundant. Let me give you one more example. I know we may be running long here. I don't know. But I did a research on the National Association of Social Workers. This is a
Your
government.
volume has dropped down, I think, there, Paul. Or maybe it's me. It might have been me that dropped down. Hold on a second here. I might have hit my talk for me.
Okay, how's that sound?
I think you're okay. It probably just I hit something on this end and my headphones weren't going right.
Okay, because I swear I didn't touch anything. No, but I did research on the National Association for Social Workers. And social workers, by the way, are people that work in hospitals, lots of them. I mean, they work in a lot of places, but one of the places is hospitals, working in neonatal care, in OBGYN, other places where people are going through the process of having their children, and they work with them. They are the probably front line that could be advising people of the science. Even if you have a hospital that says, wait a minute, we're making too much money on circumcisions in order to tell our patients not to do it. So, and that's going to happen. The social workers that work in those hospitals, though, do have an ethical responsibility to tell their clients the truth and to make them aware of research. And they have an ethical responsibility to be aware of the research. So if anybody wants to now, you can go onto the website for the National Association of Social Workers and do a search on female genital mutilation and look at the absolute library of data that comes back from them on that. It's amazing. They're doing a really good job with understanding the seriousness of that unfortunate procedure and in making sure that everybody knows it's a wrong thing to do. But go there and look up circumcision, look up male genital mutilation. You know how many returns you're going to get on it? Zero. No concern for the subject whatsoever. No research, none of the abundant body of research that's there in the same sort of formats that they got on female genital mutilation. It's absolutely ignored for boys.
Where is that site again?
It's I don't know the exact URL, but if you Google the National Association of Social Workers, it'll take you, the top return will take you to their website.
It's not on their radar. But, you know, social work is well known to be a feminist controlled and dominated field. So I'm not terribly surprised.
And it's got to be fair to say that it's the same reason if you go to the NASW site and look at their information on domestic violence, all you see is female victims, male perpetrators, the same old Duluth model crap that's always been out there. They really don't care about the science. The thing that's disturbing to me about this is that it states specifically in their code of ethics that they are to deliver services without regard to sex and a lot of other factors, race, sexuality, orientation, all those things. But it specifies sex, that they're not to deliver services in a way that is biased sexually. And all they do, I mean, their whole organization is operating in violation of their own ethical code in the most blatant and egregious ways.
Is there any feminist group that isn't in violation of their own ethics?
Yeah, Christina Hoff Sommers.
Well, that's a group of one.
That is the group. There is no others. And I will say, with all respect to Ms. Summers, that the rest of them have figured out maybe it's not a good idea to call yourself a feminist. Maybe it puts you in really lonely company.
That's not a show, right?
She does amazing work. She does really good things. I just disagree with her on that one premise. It's why we end up talking about the group of one.
Well, I've often wondered why she calls herself a feminist. I don't get it, but
her, her body, her choice.
Yeah.
I'm all for
Although
that.
Feminists don't call her a feminist. Isn't she listed as one of the top women working against women? There was some article listing.
Wouldn't surprise me. I didn't see it, but that sounds about right.
I think now who was on there? I can't remember the. this is maybe a month or so or two ago, or it went around the internet. There, the social media, a group of uh, women who are working against women or something. I can't remember the details.
Yeah, like I said, it wouldn't surprise me. I haven't heard that directly, but I've certainly seen my share of feminists who are outraged at CHS and don't want based mom talking uh, because uh, because feminism or because potato, but they just want her silenced. They've done a really poor job of getting that done, which I've been glad to see. And I will hand it to her. She's a lady with guts. She's going to say what she's going to say, and we need more of that. You know, if there were 500 more prominent feminists out there that said that they would stick with research and data and just tell the truth as they saw it, then I wouldn't have a problem with the label near as much as I do.
Well, I certainly agree with you there. I've heard a little bit of, I'm not that familiar with Christina Hoff Sommers, but I have been exposed to some of her work, and she's definitely a very bright woman. Now, I understand, though, that she was not welcome at least one campus recently where there was a protest and an attempt to prevent her from coming on campus to speak. And I don't remember what university that was, but it was at an
That
American
was, if I'm
university.
not mistaken, that was that Columbia? I think it was.
With
Of
everything
course,
that goes on at Columbia, I wouldn't be surprised.
well, yeah, and of course, sort of in this extemporaneous setting, I'm likely to pull out the wrong, say, "Oh yeah, I know what that was," and then I'm going to be proven dead wrong.
But you
Simply.
remember the incident, do you?
Oh yes, I remember it
Yeah.
very well, and I remember what's happened to Janice, and I remember what went on with Kathy Young recently, and I mean, it's sort of, I think maybe a really good project for the men's movement is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and puppy video donation drive so that we can create safe spaces for feminists on campus who are traumatized by free speech. Maybe it will help. Who is it that got PTSD from Twitter? Maybe it will help some of that not happen so much. But maybe we could help out our feminist brothers and sisters by giving them peanut butter and jelly sandwich and puppy videos and thick warm blankets and soothing music, just to hang on and cling on to during the time that there's somebody actually expressing their opinion on campus.
This whole trigger warning thing and the delicateness of apparent or proclaimed delicateness of university students today it's a mind-boggling. It's got to be a topic for a study in mass hysteria down the road. Somebody can do PhDs on this. How come all of a sudden university students can't cope with anything that's word that's too disturbing for them? You know, bizarre stuff going on right now, and it looks like in part might be genuine mass hysteria, but a lot of it I think is just a stance, pretending to be offended, pretending to be triggered, pretending that that you're that whole spiel.
Oh yeah, it's hard for me to accept that somebody really feels intimidated when they're emboldened to such absolutely atrocious actions with the knowledge that they're going to do it, and there's not going to be any consequences. It was only at Kathy Young's lecture was the first time I saw a law enforcement a representative in Canada tell protesters they had to leave the area they were in and got them out of there. That's the only time I've seen it. Back in
Well,
2012.
they did say that protesters had to leave for Janice Fiamengo's in University of Ottawa a year ago, or maybe it was a year and a half ago now. They told them to leave, they just didn't leave. And then when the fire alarm went off, they put Janice into a new room and didn't let the identified troublemakers into that room. So it's a slow process. They were taking mild action, I would say.
Well, I know that how politically incorrect this is, but I've been thinking for a few years, Steve, now that Canadian police, particularly in Toronto, might benefit from some testosterone injections because they seem to be absolutely spineless against these punk kids who are disrupting the free. I mean, you don't have the Bill of Rights in Canada, but you do have the Canadian Charter, which I think guarantees the free expression of ideas, does it not?
Well, yeah, we do have some rights, and I can't say I really understand the legalese of all that. I know there's differences between private property and public property, and there's also some provisions for allowing for civil protests and whatnot, not like that. I think, though, I'm going to just disagree with you slightly on the Toronto assessment, Paul.
Okay.
Toronto, the police, when they
Oh
did
no,
show up.
wait a minute. Can I get a safe room now? Because you're going to disagree with me. Can I watch some puppy videos while you talk? Because, I can't handle anybody thinking differently than me.
Well, I want to see you hugging your teddy bear while I talk. Okay. And if you will
I'd
do
have
that
to
for
have one
me,
first.
I'll buy you a beer.
Okay.
When I
Teddy
see.
bears for beer. I like it.
But just to when I was there with the filming the Warren Farrell protest, when the police did show up, they were a little slow because, to be honest, it's not a life and death situation. In my mind, the security guards should be authorized to remove them, from the doorways. We don't need to involve the police, because I really don't seriously believe that anyone was going to get into like any kind of serious fighting there, like for real. It was a standoff. There was yelling, there's hurt feelings, and there was blocking of the door. And I disagree with all that blocking of the door stuff. But I was there through the whole thing, and I didn't seriously feel like I was going to be in serious physical harm. Now, when the police showed up, now they didn't take prisoners. They could have done some arrests for sure, if they wanted to. And I'm okay with them not going straight to arrests, because really that just clogs up the police system and the courts, and it clogs up the jails for minor trouble. But the police, they wasted no time getting them away from the door. They came in there. There was about, I don't know, 10 or 15 of them. They yanked them off. They threw them to the ground. They pushed them away from the door. They established a barricade. They had shut that thing down in about 30 seconds.
Well, I tell you what, there's a real good example. Not only did I sit and tolerate hearing your dissent from my opinion and not have post-traumatic stress disorder, I didn't even need a half a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. By the time you were done, I started thinking, well, yeah, that he's probably right.
But where's the teddy bear? The teddy bear.
I didn't need one this time. You're going to have to come up with a better disagreement than that. Of course, I'm looking around. I got a couple of wooden fish. Will that do?
You're going to be a hard guy to trigger. I can see that.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. I'm working on being a victim, and I'm not very good at it, unfortunately.
Now the Ottawa one, I think, could have been done better. Like they just about delayed the speech for the lecture for an hour or so. This is the one previously. This one last time, the police did a pretty good job. I can't complain with them. I don't really want to go down, be in a police state where the police come in on a minor thing like that and start like slamming heads to the ground,
Well, you're talking about my neighborhood right now. And again, it's true. It's part of my perspective is shaped in Houston. If a police officer tells you to do something, it's not a suggestion.
You have to obey immediately, right?
Or you will be in cuffs every time. They don't care who you are. They don't care how crowded the jail is. They don't care about anything. If they don't feel in control, and especially because this is absolutely a much more violent place than major Canadian cities.
Right.
If the police don't feel in control of what's going on around them, they don't feel safe. So they are going to insist on immediate compliance. And that's why if a police officer in Houston or any other American city says, I need you to do something, I just say, yes, sir, and do it.
Not the time to argue, right?
No.
And there's different needs for different places. I found that the Ottawa one, personally, I wasn't happy with the protesters. They were just being a bunch of spoiled brats as far as I could see, and they were annoying. On the one side, I saw them as annoying. On the other side, hey, it makes good footage. I got 20,000 something views off of that, you know? So as as a videographer, you know, be an ass. It's good for views.
Oh
But
yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, you've given a sterling example of making that work, Steve. It's one of the reasons we love you so much. Uh,
well, it's a small service, and I'm happy to do it when I can. But you know, the police guy at the time, you know, everybody was really just wanting to get into the talk and get on with it. So a lot of people would have been happy to see the police kind of round them up and stick them in cuffs and drag them away. But at the end of the day, it was only an extra 5 or 6, 7 minutes for the policeman, the officer, and you can see it in the video, convince them. You know, there was a little tension there when the officer and the one woman got into a little head to head, but in the end, he made them see his point. And I think if they had pressed it for another 10 minutes, he probably would have put some cuffs on people and
he
dragged them
looked
in.
serious about it. He was trying to give them an opportunity to end it peacefully and without being arrested. It was obvious, but it was also obvious to me, and I think it ultimately was obvious to the protesters from what I saw in your film, that telling him no anymore was not an option.
No, it was not an option. And I think he conveyed that. I think that officer did a really sterling job
He did.
under the circumstances, you know. He kept his cool. He ended it peacefully and went away. Now, on the other side of it, they're there with face masks on. I don't like that personally.
Well, isn't that illegal in Canada?
I think it is. Now, if there's anything, I think that in the future events, I hope that they order them to take off their face masks, you know. If you're going to protest, you have a right to protest, but I don't. Somebody posted a link to the Canadian law on the video, and I didn't follow it out, but it looked like a link to a government law site. The guy who posted it claimed that there was pertinent law in there that you're not allowed to cover your face if you're doing a protest. Now, there may be circumstances in which you're allowed to cover your face in Canada. I really don't know, but apparently that law stipulates that if you're protesting, you have to identify yourself. So all of those protesters, I think, could have been arrested just on that basis.
Yep. And that's, again, maybe it'll take time to build. That's been part of my frustration. I heard about that law some time ago and thought it was ironic that after the 2012 thing that you filmed and the reaction from the men's community, the protesters all started wearing masks because they didn't want to be identified. And so that's a tradition with this particular crowd that goes back, you know, a couple of good years, 3 years now, where they're doing that. But I was hoping that sometime during this process that Canadian authorities would wake up to the fact that it appears to be against Canadian law to do that. And that's a really sound thinking. I believe fully in the right of protest. The right of mask wearing protesters, I'm not so sure about. That sounds like a setup for danger to me.
Yeah, I'm on board with that too. You know, there has to be some limits to this stuff because, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, if you have a mask on and you bonk somebody over the head and run away, your chances of getting caught are pretty minimal.
Or pull a fire alarm.
Yeah.
And anyway, just from a personal standpoint, is that if you need to cover your face to speak, maybe you don't have much to say.
You certainly don't want to own your words if you're covering your face, right?
And that won't do. And hopefully, some point in the future, Steve, we're going to put some pressure on some of these people that are mutilating children to start putting on the masks themselves. And I don't mean surgical masks. I mean where they need to hide who they are, because this, I'm not going to stop. This is a good 3-4 year project right here, just to hammer at these guys and make it apparent to them. I saw one intactivist recently that was in a protest earlier this year, I think, and a circumcision doctor, a woman, and I forget her name. I'll try to get you the video of that because I caught it on video.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
She said they should have cut off your whole penis. This is from a doctor.
Pediatrician.
Yeah, a pediatrician.
Yep. And she was at a pediatrician's conference. She was coming and going that week to this conference on for pediatricians. I remember it. Now she was a little bit provoked in there. They were harsh on her, and not that I'm going to say that excuses that. I honestly, when I saw it, I don't think she really was being serious. She was responding to the provocation, and that doesn't, you know, I'm not trying to defend her, okay, because I'm
No,
on
I
board
don't
with
think
you
that
on
at
this.
all.
But I think at the end of the day, it's not entirely the whole story to say that she just came out and said, oh, we should just cut off a kid's penis. Uh,
Well, here's how I look at it, Steve, and I look at it. I have to admit, somewhat evilly. I agree with you. I think they were being provocative, and I think provocative protest is a good, healthy
oh
thing.
yeah, I think
Uh,
they have to be provocative in this
yeah,
situation.
which is why we're going to do it the way we're going to do it. But whether or not she actually meant that literally, or she was just feeling defensive and provoked and reacted, I still love the PR gold of her saying that in front of a camera,
Yeah, yeah.
because it does, on some level, reveal her lack of empathy. Um, uh, we're talking about, largely, the guy she said that to was uncircumcised, but we're still talking largely about a group of people that feel that they're trying to protect children who are being mutilated, and to mock they're supposed to be angry. I'm angry about it.
Hmm.
We're all supposed to be angry about this stuff. And to do that, and then to have somebody react to that indignation by saying they should have cut your whole penis off, um, it is revealing. It may not be 100% revealing of her nature and character as a human being, but there is an element to that I do find revealing in where she's at. She makes a living off of cutting on baby boys. That's
Yeah.
part of her job. And so she would rather defend that than to listen to anybody's pain about it happening.
Right. And you do raise a good point there, is that she could have responded to this provocation in many ways. One of the ways would be by um, having some compassion for the issue, which she didn't express any compassion whatsoever for the issue. She was defensive and defended it, and then through her frustration with defending it, she, stepped it up. She escalated her rhetoric to that point. So I don't intend to let her off the hook entirely. And some good may come of it, and that on reflection, she may change her ways. And
If
she may
there
be,
is one child that is spared being mutilated because a parent saw that video and that interaction, it'll be worth it 1,000 times over to me,
mhm,
even one of them. So I'm fine with it. I mean, this is not, we're talking about going up against power. We're talking about the AMA. We're talking about the medical establishment and all the money that they have. Um, they are going to be as formidable as dealing with insane feminists, because they have the financing
yeah.
to do things that we don't have.
Well, they
But
have a financial stake in continuing the practice.
yes, they owe a big one.
Yeah. So that's as big a barrier as addressing the science, or perhaps even bigger barrier than overcoming the religious objection, not objection, but the religious support for circumcision and the cultural practice. That barrier of people not wanting to let go of a revenue stream is incredibly hard to fight.
Yeah, it is. But guess what? We're going to fight it anyway. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It's time to quit mutilating baby boys.
Yeah.
It is time to quit mutilating baby boys. It's not that part. We can discuss it, but let's stop mutilating them till the discussion ends. Because I think the discussion is going to end with any reasonable person saying, of course, we're not supposed to mutilate baby boys sexually.
So, Paul, I'm assuming that all of the research that you've discussed is going to be posted on this site, childmutilators.com, right?
A ton of it and more. There is a lot. There was, and I think his name was Thompson, a psychologist, one of the most compelling, emotionally stirring videos I've ever seen. Is an Australian psychologist about my age, definitely a middle-aged man, really discovered a lot of stuff about himself related to his circumcision. And here's a clinical psychologist that made this straight on face video talking in all honesty about the damage that had been done in his life.
What
And
was
what
his
he
name?
found out. I'm sorry?
What was his name?
I think it's Thompson, but it'll be one of the many bits of information that I get to you. I'll send you a link to the video. It is absolute. We posted it on AVFM, and I'm shocked that in the 1,000 postings that we put on AVFM that you have not read and memorized all of them. Well, I will get that to you. But this is really the heart of it. This guy talked from the perspective of a human being and from the perspective of a clinical psychologist who was highly educated on the issue and really showed you what this stuff is. And so I'll get that to you so your readers can, your viewers can link to it. I'll get you all the other research, but yes, at childmutilators.com, the URL is the only thing hyperbolic there, if it's hyperbolic. I somewhat disagree that even that is hyperbolic, but anything else is just going to be straight up data and information made to appeal, not to continue targeting the people doing it, but made to appeal to the sensibilities of parents who are having children and making decisions that will affect their child for the rest of their life. That's who we need to reach. That's who we need to get to with this information, and just plead with them to stop for one moment and think about why are you doing this? Why on earth are you doing this? And would you please just read this research and ask yourself again if you really want that for your child. And I think a lot of people will decide not to. Not all of them. Some people are just, they're on autopilot. Yeah, whatever. I talked to somebody a few weeks ago, actually, an extended member of my family, who was just adamant. It didn't matter. It was God's will.
Well, one day, if I'm reading this material or hearing this right, this should be made illegal entirely in around the world. It doesn't seem to be a reason for it. Paul, when do you anticipate getting what is it called? childmutilators.com live?
That depends entirely on community response. If, again, like with any other men's issues, getting people motivated to actually do something is difficult. People have their fears about doing it, but we're going to get it up. I would say at the very latest, it's going to be about 3 to 4 months. However, if we can get one volunteer, and this is why I'm going to hammer it out there until I get blue-faced about it. If we could get one volunteer with WordPress skills, with decent WordPress skills, that's willing to spend 2, 3, 4 days working on developing a website in the way we need in order to use for this platform. Because see, the beauty is this will be on ABFM servers. This will be under our domain umbrella. And we have a lot of reach with Google. This can work to start calling these doctors out, to generate media attention about it, and to do something that has not been done before, which is to systematically take this to the medical community as a problem and to appeal to parents to make different decisions. So what we need, 2 things. We need a WordPress developer that's willing to give some time to help us set this up. It's a Genesis theme, and a Genesis, of course, a Genesis child theme. All widgets, really relatively simple for most. The person will need to know some CSS and the other stuff that web developers do in the course of their jobs. The other thing that might be helpful is a graphic designer who is willing to help us develop a logo for the site. We can do that. I mean, we can pitch in and get it done for a few $100s, no problem, but it will help us immensely if we have people involved that want to do something about this horrible practice, will step up with some of their skills and help us. So WordPress and a
Graphic
logo
designer.
And they can contact me at paul@avoiceformen.com anytime. I'm not a hard person to reach, especially if I want to talk to you. So by all means, please reach me at paul@avoiceformen.com. If you've got the skills to help out with this, it would be greatly appreciated. And I think you would be doing a great thing to help make these child mutilators feel very uncomfortable about what they're doing with the public spotlight on them. And I don't see anything else making them change.
Terrific, Paul. You've given us a ton to think about tonight, and I'm really looking forward to getting those links from you about all that research. One other thing I wanted to just ask you, did you bring up a doctor's name that was a anti-circumcision person? Or intactivist, intactivist you call it now, right?
Well, yeah, I brought up doctors opposed to circumcision, and they're not by any means the only group of medical people and religious people. There is a Jewish group that is banded together to oppose circumcision.
Okay.
If you look at anti-circumcision groups with a single Google search, you'll see them. They're out there. They're out there being ignored. And with all respect to them, I think most of them are being ignored because they're not actually doing anything to confront the people that are cutting on children.
Do you know of anyone, any doctor that would come on and talk to us live? You and
Not
I.
Yet, but I can sure put it on my to-do list to get one, and I bet I can.
I would love to host the conversation with you and a doctor in the know, in the field, who is fighting against circumcision.
I will make that happen, and we'll do it on your channel because I think you do a great job at these. You're a very balanced interviewer, and let's get it done. We'll do it, but let's make sure that by 2016, an alarm bell has gone off across Western medical culture about circumcisions, and that they are aware that while profitable and while socially acceptable at this time, that there is groups forming, organizations forming that are not going to just say, please don't do this and leave it at that.
I think the first shot has been fired at that pediatrician conference. That video would qualify as the first shot across the bow on that, I think, don't you think?
Yes, I think it would qualify as the first shot across the bow. And now I think we need to put one into the bow.
Terrific.
They haven't responded. We're going to do this. I mean, it's not going to be with some of the hyperbole, some of the outrageousness that we engage in at AVFM. But make no mistake about that. That doesn't mean that we're going to be nice.
Terrific. So, Paul, that was a really engaging conversation, and probably this is a good time to put it to an end. I'll look forward to getting those links from you, and I'll put them up in the comments so people who want to get going at that can have a place. And I suspect there's a place on AVFM where this information is available now as well. You mentioned a article by, I think, was it Thompson on your site?
Oh no, it's the video by he's the psychologist in Australia that did the video. I will get you that link with this stuff.
Okay.
This is a must see if you're interested in doing something to stop this horrible practice. You need to watch this guy's video. I mean, it's amazing.
Okay, so viewers, look in the comments, in the description, in the next day or two if you want to get going at any of this research, or of course contact Paul directly at paul@avoiceformen.com. Paul's looking for a WordPress developer and a graphic designer who are willing to contribute some time to getting this website, which will be called, or is called, childmutilators.com, up and going as soon as possible so we can get to addressing this issue of male genital mutilation, also known as circumcision. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And Paul, I'll talk to you very soon.
Take care. Thank you, Steve. Good night, everybody.
Good night.